Good morning. Got another day of projects planned here. What I'm going to do is swap the turbo on this Dodge. I'm going to change out the intercooler, put in some 3-inch intercooler piping, and I'm going to change the intake horn as well. Alright, give me a second, I'll show you some parts. Alright, here's the parts we're working with. You can see the Powerstroke intercooler down there at the bottom left. You can see two 3-inch sticks of intercooler piping. You can see a center section for a new turbo. You can see a compressor housing for a new turbo, new oil drain line, some V-band clamps, a 90-degree radius bend there with a 3-inch discharge. Also got a 2.5-inch discharge I may try to use. A couple of hose ends there, depending on what we need. And there's the new intake horn, which is from the later model 12 valve, possibly 24, I can't recall. You can see enough gaskets there to get us through that, and that includes our intake horn gaskets. And this is what we're starting with, the standard intercooled 12 valve Dodge Cummins setup. You can see that kind of restrictive intake horn there, but there's the stock piping. There's the, it's not an H1C, but it's an early HX35. We can make some improvements by changing out this intersection. Part of the thing I was trying to fix here is you can see that there's a elbow right there. That elbow is actually a V-band clamp elbow. It's just been reused with boots, so it's not quite right, and I thought it was something I'd like to fix. We're reusing that oil feed line there. Alright, let's get started. Okay, here you can see we've gotten to the step where we're going to pull the intercooler off. Just wanted to give you a couple of little tips before you did that, and of course you could always take a step back and put it back on, but I made a couple of little marks there just to tell myself where the existing intercooler was in relation to the radiator support and where the inlet and outlet ports were, because as you modify this, you know, you're going to cut this off, you're going to cut this off, and you know, you're going to need to adjust your hood latch. But in trying to find where to put everything, I found it helpful to sort of know where you started from. And this is a good time to take the hood latch off entirely. That way, if in your excitement you want to go for a drive and you slam that shut without having trimmed it, you won't puncture your new intercooler. Here's the differences between the Powerstroke and the first-gen Dodge Ram intercooler. You can see on the left the Powerstroke intercooler is physically taller, although not much wider. You can see the inlet and outlet are 3-inch versus 2.5-inch, and one more important characteristic, you can see the depth of the intercooler is a little bit larger than the Dodge right there. Alright, give me a few minutes and I'll show you some mock-up. Alright, so here you can see the difference between the stock intercooled truck intake horn and the 24 or 12 valve 5.9 intake horn. You know, in addition to this being a 2.5-inch, that's a 3-inch. As you can see, it's quite a bit larger and has a gentler bend entering the intake. I had to get some longer bolts for this position from McMaster. If you're ordering this off of eBay, choose one where the picture includes these bolts, because your stock bolts will be that length, which is fine for those two, but you will need the longer length for these two. You know, or if you're buying this off Craigslist, make sure they throw in the bolts, because if someone were upgrading to the Banks dual inlet, super Y, you know, fuck knows what, right? They wouldn't need those, but you will. And this is where you'll want to mount the dipstick tube. I've got a little bracket here off to the left that I'm letting the paint dry on before I hang that out. Alright, I've got the new center section of the turbo mounted. I'm going to move that drain line a little bit more, get it away from the frame down here. As you can see, I've got to remount the wastegate actuator, and then before I start this up, which, you know, isn't right now, I'm going to pour some oil down this to give a little prime to those journal bearings, and I'll add the feed line back. Still got to put the compressor housing back on the front, but all in all going pretty well. I did figure something out here. It might be helpful to you guys. When you're taking this apart, you see how you can't get to this bolt, and it turns out you can't get to the bolt under here. But if you loosen these four, you know, just half a turn or whatever, you should be able to rotate the housing, and you can get this inlet boss out of the way of that bolt, and you can get a box end on it. Same thing with this one down here. I had enough trouble with this one down here that it took me about 30 minutes to get it off, and I had to hit it with quite a bit of propane to get it, well, heat, to get it to break loose. Had I realized I could have just rotated the housing, which you can because there's no pin between these two, I would have done that, and then I would have been able to get a box end on it and take it right off. All right, anyhow. All right, this is about the best fitment I got on this. I just wanted to show you a helpful tip here. So I used a couple packs of cards I had lying around, and I used some cardboard, you know, folded over 4 times to sort of give me a decent spacing away from the frame and then from the body. That way I don't end up having this thing touch the frame or touch the body. You know, you can see you got a little gap there and you got that gap there. So now what I'm going to do is, with a piece of square tubing, come out of this and go over to there. Same thing over here, and then up here at the top I'll just do a piece of ready rod from our buddy, you know, as our buddy Zip Ties and Bi-Splice says, old Peg. Do the same thing over there. I might put you know, a rubber washer behind it or something so it's not a fixed mount. And then, as you can see, I'm going to have to trim that secondary hood latch. Alright, this is what I ended up with as far as what I needed to trim and the mounts I needed to add. So I ended up having to trim both the inside and the outside of the existing cutouts. Ended up having to add that little plate there because there wasn't a place to drop in that rubber standoff. This is how I chose to provide a mount for the Powerstroke Intercooler. Now you can see you got a little strut there. I had to trim the hood mount, or sorry, the hood latch mount. I still haven't cut the secondary hood latch. I'll do that later. You can see this is the same style here. You can see I also had to cut both the inside and outside of the existing punch out. And I went ahead and just bridged those two because I've got a power steering cooler I want to route over it. You can see I use that same type of stud and stud standoff. Went ahead and painted everything flat black. And then here's the Powerstroke Intercooler after the final fit. I went ahead and threw a coat of flat black on it because I'm going to have to pull, fairly certain I'm going to have to pull all of those grill inserts out. So I don't want to be staring at you know, a big piece of aluminum sticking out of the front end. I want it to be kind of low key. Alright, so give me a few minutes here and I'll put this back together. Alright, this is where I'm at after reinstalling the intercooler. I've mounted the compressor discharge housing, no, the compressor housing, using that 2.5 degree outlet, 90 degree bend. Wasn't able to use the 3-inch one from the later model Dodge. Ended up being a pretty straight run of pipe there. I did the bead rolling on each end, no problem. You can see going in there, you really do need to use a longer boot. That was the longer boot available on intake hoses. Had to move a radiator reservoir over a little bit, and I couldn't get a screw back there. I could get these two in, but not this one, so I just threw a piece of zip tie on it for now. And this is the part I wanted to show for anybody putting on this Powerstroke intercooler. See how close the boot is to the battery tray. So what I'm going to do is pull the battery tray, and I'm going to see if the battery tray can be moved, you know, an inch or two that way, or if I need to trim the battery tray. Alright, give me a few minutes, I'll show you the result. Alright, I got the front grill back on. I chose to leave the top 2 inserts in because there's not a problem with clearance. The lower ones there is, and you can see actually the grill needs a little bit of trimming as well from the underside. The way I set it, you needed it too, but I don't intend to put the lower fascia back on because the amount of trimming it would require would kind of make it useless. Besides that, I'm going to put a winch bumper there, so I'm not going to be able to see it. I did want to show how the battery tray went back in. So you can see what I did is I trimmed off the edge and I dropped in a piece of 1/4 inch rod. You can see there where I started and stopped the cut, and I just took it all the way up to the top edge. So that gives you plenty of room there, no problem. It's also able to move this maybe a 1/4 inch towards the driver's side, so that gave me a little bit more room. But this turned out okay. The one thing I don't love is that's a little bit cocked, but I think I've got enough boot in there to keep it. So let's take it for a test drive.